What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Let's just get right into it. I came across an article the other day, and apparently Congress is petitioning to the president to ban the box. And what that is they want the president to sign an executive order um, barring employers from being able to ask you when you fill an application out for employment as to whether or not you've had a criminal background check. Now, you might those of you who have been on the wrong side of the legal system might be thinking, "Oh, that's a good thing." Well, it's really not. And this is um, a flawed in my mind. This is a flawed attempt to um, prolong the inevitable. So when you fill out an application, everybody knows for whatever type of job you're applying for. Usually you'll see, a line or a couple lines or a box that says something to the effect of, have you ever been convicted of or pled guilty to uh, a felony? And then you'll usually have a separate one that says, have you ever been convicted of or pled guilty to a misdemeanor, excluding traffic tickets and things like that. Now, what Congress is proposing is that an executive order be signed stating that employers cannot put that box or ask those questions at the time that you fill out an application. In fact, there are already a couple states. I know California, and I want to also say Massachusetts, if I'm not mistaken, that employers are not allowed to ask you during the initial application process about your criminal background history. Um, but here's the problem, though. That doesn't negate you having a criminal background history and your higher ability for that job that you're applying for. So, what Congress is actually attempting to do is their logic, and this is why I say it's flawed. Their logic is okay, if we give people the opportunity to present their credentials and to show what their qualifications are, then later on in the hiring process, before someone's offered um, a position that's usually on the condition of whether or not you can pass a criminal background check and or a drug screen, which everyone's doing nowadays anyway. What their logic is that if you've provided your credentials and you've provided your qualifications and you're well qualified and experienced for the job that you're applying for, their logic is that maybe when an employer finds out about your criminal background, that won't necessarily um, disqualify you from the process of being hired. That's bullshit. We all know that. Now, here's the problem that I have with this whole system um, in general. So, the purpose of the legal system is not to just punish someone for breaking the law or committing a crime. The main purpose of the criminal justice system is supposed to be to rehabilitate those who have committed a crime and who have, um, so to speak, paid their debt to society, and be able to be reincorporated back into society and hopefully become productive citizens. But that doesn't happen under the system that's currently in place and has pretty much been in place, since this country became a country. Now, look, I'm a realist. So with me, it is what it is. If you're going to tell me that there's a system in place, that if I commit a crime, I'm pretty much going to be screwed for the rest of my life, then it is what it is. We're all adults here. The adult criminal justice system is the way it is. And so we all know right from wrong. We all know what rules and laws we shouldn't be breaking. And we all know that with certain laws that we do break, the potential there for us to be sent to prison or be sent to county jail or be put on probation or, all these things that will cause us to not be able to um, find gainful employment down the line If that was the way it was and it was straightforward, then it is what it is. What I have a problem with is when it's promoted and advertised that this country is all about, you know, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. There's this American dream out there that we can all attain, when it's really not the case. Because the way that the criminal justice system is set up is in such a way that even though you've committed a crime, let's say you committed a robbery, and the criminal justice system stipulates that, okay, for the crime that you committed, we have to give you 5 years in state prison. Okay? Now, with good behavior, most people who have been a part of the criminal justice system, or, just by doing a little bit of research, you know that if you're given a sentence of 5 years, with good behavior and parole, you can probably be out in 3 or 3.5 years. And then there's an exit process as well. So you don't just go from prison to home and then you're free from the system. So what typically happens is, once you're released from the custody of a correctional facility, there's usually two things that happen. You're either placed on parole and then fitted with a ankle bracelet or some type of tracking, GPS tracking mechanism, or you're put on probation for the duration of your sentence, or whatever time the court decides they want to put you on probation after you've served your time. And usually there's a mandatory, monthly or bi-weekly check-in with your parole or probation officer, or whatever the case may be. And usually there are court fees and fines, and maybe restitution, depending on the crime you committed, that's associated with um, that supervision from you being released from prison. Now, the way that they promote the system is, you do your time, okay? Once you've fulfilled all obligations, once you've satisfied all the requirements of your release, you've done your time, you've followed all the rules, and you've made it through parole or probation, and you've paid off your fines, and you've done everything that you're supposed to do. All right? And they say, okay, you're done, your case is closed, you're free to go. Under the way that they promote it, what should happen from there should be that you should be allowed to go forward and do whatever it is you need to do to become a productive member of society. You should be able to go and apply for any job that you're qualified for or had the experience to do, and not have to worry about someone saying, well, we ran a background check on you and we saw that, and 1990 whatever or 2000 whatever, you committed this crime and you went to state prison for 5 years. So we're not going to be able to hire you. That defeats the whole purpose of the criminal justice system, the way that they promote it. Because supposedly, you put me in prison for 5 years to rehabilitate me, and then you put me back into society. But now, because of the ability of any employer, even if it's a manager at McDonald's, to run a background check on me, now I can't even get employment. So that former criminal, who may very well want to be a productive member of society at that point, is really left with very little alternatives. And usually what happens is they end up right back in the justice system, because they feel there's nothing for them to um, aspire to, and so they revert back to what it is they know. Now, the ideal way that the criminal justice system should work is exactly the way they promote it. If you're going to tell me that for my actions, these are the consequences: 2 years in prison, 5 years, 5 years probation, whatever the case may be, you determined what my debt to society was going to be. Now, I paid that debt, even though it was involuntary, because no one volunteers to go to prison. I've paid that debt to society, and now you're going to tell me that even though I've paid my debt to society and I've fulfilled all my responsibilities and obligations, um, that were set forth for me to, in order to be released from the criminal justice system now for the next 5, 10, 20 years, and sometimes, depending on um, the crime and or the job that you're applying for the rest of your life. So that's not the American dream. That's not that's not the way that you're promoting that the criminal justice system is in existence for. And we all know that it's big business. Look, the majority of the prison system now is being privatized, and you know the government is actually making money the more people they keep in prison. The only thing I have a problem with is, you know, if you're currently in the system, say you're in prison, you're on a work release, or you're in a halfway house, or you're on parole or probation, then I can understand someone who may be a little iffy about hiring you. You haven't yet gone through the process and repaid your debt to society. But once I've completed all that, I don't, this is just my personal opinion, and this is why we discuss these things so that you guys can chime in and say what you feel, and then we can really get into a debate about it. But my personal opinion is that if for any action of mine, the consequence that was put forth for me to endure because of that action, fine. You know, I'll deal with what I have to deal with. I stand behind whatever I do. So if I make a mistake in life, or if I slip up or do something that I know full well I shouldn't have, and the consequence for that is for me to be now put through the criminal justice system, fine. But once I've fully paid my debt to society and met all obligations that was set forth for me to do, at that point, I don't feel like it should be at an employer's discretion to simply put my name into a computer search engine, or hire a company to look up my information and see whether or not I had a criminal record at a certain point. And you know, it's the way that this country and this government is set up. Anybody with half a brain, you don't have to be a college grad, you don't have to have a PhD or a master's. It's very common sense. It's very logical. It really is. Half of the issues that we have with unemployment, with you know, crime within our inner cities, um, you know, so many fatherless children out here, so many communities that are impoverished. It's very simple to see what the issue is, and it's very clear on what things could be done to rectify these situations. But big business doesn't want these situations rectified. They don't want thriving inner city communities. They don't want black, Hispanic, you know, children to have their fathers at home when they belong, or able to find a gainful employment so that they could take care of their families. They don't want these things because it, it generates more money for them when we're locked up, when we're away from our children, when we're in the system on child support, and you know, our kids' mothers are on welfare and housing and on Section 8 and all these things that, in my opinion, would go away very quickly and on a massive scale if certain things about the justice system were changed. I really do believe that if anybody who committed a criminal offense and was sent to county jail or prison or whatever the case may be, and you know, pardon my voice, we don't do edits here. Everything is straight raw. But I truly believe that if the logic of the criminal justice system met the logic of so many people who think like myself, that you know, if you do the crime, yes, you have to do the time, but once you've done the time, you should be able to be reintegrated into society and not have that label 10 years down the line. Oh well, you did something 15 years ago and had to serve 5 years in prison. And even though it's 10 years later, even though it's 5 years later or 7 years later, and in my mind, this is, the logic of the employer, you're still a criminal. So I don't want you around my clients. I don't want you in my place of business. I don't want you operating my company vehicles. I don't want you having access to um, confidential information or whatever the case may be, because it's all about liability and it's all about insurance. And a lot of times these employers, especially when they're publicly traded companies, and they have boards to answer to, it's simply put in the rules. You cannot hire somebody who is a felon. And I think it's the most ridiculous. Now, mind you, I'm within reason because I do understand that there are certain positions that people who've committed crimes, depending on what those crimes and depending on the position that they're applying for, I very well do think that some people should not even be allowed in working in stations where um, the crimes that they committed in the past could potentially be an issue because of that um, because of that job station. So there are some areas in which I do agree with how things are currently set up. But on the same token, though, don't tell a person that this is the debt you have to repay me, and when that person repays that debt, they're still um, they're still indebted. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it's capitalism 101 to me. If I go into a dealership with the approval from the bank to purchase a car that costs $15,000, and that bank gives me 60 months, 5 years to pay off that $15,000 car loan. At the end of that 60 months, when the interest and the principal of that vehicle is paid off, the bank issues me a pink slip or a title. Now, what would happen if after that 60 months, after that last car payment is made, the bank says, you know what? You've obligated your payments set forth in the loan requirements. You've paid your debt to us, but we're not going to give you the title to the car. We're going to charge you 50% of what you were paying over the past 60 months until we feel like we don't want you to pay us anymore. What would happen? Every single person, rich, middle class, or poor, would revolt. And it wouldn't take very long before um, something would be done about that. It's basically the same thing that's happening to people who are trapped in the criminal justice system and can't find their way out. It's typically the same thing. It's an extreme example of essentially the same thing. You're telling me that my debt for a crime I committed is 5 years, or 2 years, or 7 years, or 10 years. I've paid my debt to you. I've paid my debt to society for what I've done. Now then, why do I have to still pay another 10 years, another 15 years, when I've already given 5, 10 years out of my life repaying the debt that you told me I had to pay for my crime? And then the people who do commit these crimes, and when they are released from, whatever form of custody that they were under, whether it be physical custody where they lost their freedom and had to be in a correctional facility, whether it be administrative custody where they're on parole or probation, um, whatever form of custody someone is subjected to for a crime that they committed, allow them to become a productive member of society after that. Because then if you don't, and then if they revert back to what they know, then don't call them criminals because you're setting the board for how you want things to turn out for that person. And I just feel like no employer, unless it's the federal government, the military of some kind of military job or a federal job, contract or what have you, um, no employer, no private employer should be able to access records of anybody for anything that they've done in the past if they've served their debt to society for that wrongdoing. The logic doesn't even work. Even if, because most people will say, well, you know, most business owners would say, well, I don't want a criminal working at my company. Most employees would say, well, I don't want to work with somebody who could have been a murderer or a robber or, committed a violent crime. I don't want to work with that person. Who knows what they're going to do? That's kind of flawed logic because we don't know what anyone is capable of doing at any given point in time. The only difference between someone who's applying for a job who has a criminal background and someone who doesn't have a criminal background is not that that person necessarily lived a squeaky clean life. The only difference is that someone got caught doing what they were doing wrong and someone didn't. There are over 7 billion people on this planet, living on this planet, okay? Young and old, all races, all nationalities. You're not going to tell me that if 10 out of 10 people walk into a job interview and 2 people are on record as having committed some type of criminal offense in their past for which they were either convicted of, charged with, or pled guilty to, that those are the only 2 people out of that 10 who did something that would keep them from getting that job. I'd be more convinced that it would probably be about 6 or 7. The difference is that everyone just doesn't get caught. You could be interviewing a serial killer who hasn't yet gotten caught, and you think that's the perfect person for the job, when really the person who might have shoplifted from a Walmart 3 years prior and got 2 years probation for it, but has all the qualifications for that job and all the experience for that job, but because that person has a criminal record, you look at that person as um, not even being worthy of you taking the time to sit down and talk to that person. Because this whole eliminate the box or get rid of the box, it's not going to do anything. I don't care at which point in the hiring process you, as an employer, discovers that an applicant has a criminal background. 9 out of 10 employers, it does not matter. They're not going to entertain hiring that person. And you can't say, well, what if the government puts certain rules in place that says that, just because a person has a criminal background, it's you're not allowed as an employer to automatically disqualify them from a certain position. It should depend on things like the time since they've committed an offense, the type of offense, and all these things that have to be, um, accounted for. Well, that's pretty much how they claim it's set up now. But you can't prove something like that. An employer could say, well, we didn't hire this person because this person has stronger qualifications, or we didn't hire this person because this person had this, or this person impressed us more during the interview. You can't prove regulations on what an employer can and can't do pertaining to an applicant who has a criminal background. What you can do, and what's the only fail-safe thing to do, and the only logical thing to do, is to not give access to employers to someone's background unless it's something that pertains strictly to that position that they're applying for. For example, if I apply to be a pharmacist at a local pharmacy, CVS, Walgreens, or even a doctor's office, or what have you, or a hospital, then yes, of course, that employer should be able to look into my background and see that I actually have the credentials to do that job. If you want to be a doctor, obviously a background check needs to be done to see that you have a medical license. These are the common sense things, you know. If someone like me who has a commercial driver's license is applying to um, do a job that requires me to have a commercial driver's license, then of course that employer should be able to look into my background and see that I actually have a commercial driver's license and for how long I've had it and what job functions I performed that required the use of that commercial driver's license. But as it pertains to criminal background, I don't believe that any employer should have the right to do that. Um, if you're someone who committed a crime that is um, reasonably, in my mind, um, something that is correctable and something that you can be rehabilitated for. Because, being honest and being reasonable, there are certain offenders who can't be rehabilitated. Serial killers are what they are, and they will probably be that until the day that they die. Same thing with um, child molesters, pedophiles, rapists. These are are offenders that I understand will probably never be rehabilitated because there's a mental aspect there. But if you look at the criminal justice system, it accounts for these people. If you're a serial killer and you're caught and convicted, you're not getting out of jail. You're serving life, if not 2 or 3 life sentences. If you're a serial rapist or a child molester or something of that nature, you're going to do such an exorbitant amount of time in prison. And then even when you get out, you're registered as a sex offender. You're registered as, somebody who um, harms people violently. You know, in those situations, yes, because society for the most part needs to be kept safe. But when you're talking about someone who commits a crime of circumstance, you know, someone shoplifts or someone, you know, robs a convenience store or someone's, selling drugs or, you know, whatever the case may be. These are crimes where it's a set crime, it's a nonviolent crime. You've done your time for it. Why do you still have access to my history? And I strongly feel that until the criminal justice system changes um, these things, we're never going to see a decrease in violence in our inner cities. We're never going to see um, the number of fathers who are on child support and trapped in the criminal justice system and can't be at home to take care of their children. Um, there's it's always going to be a problematic environment, and these types of problems um, breed other types of problems. If you want all the things the society says is wrong with society to um, to improve, then there are things that need to be done on the higher level in order to allow for these things to be improved, or it's never going to happen. So don't necessarily be upset with the criminal or the person who committed an offense. Be upset with the way the system is set up because anybody can do something wrong. But the people that I can have respect for are the people who do something wrong and they stand up and they accept the accountability and they work their ass off to do what they need to do to rectify that situation. How can you not want to give that person a chance? We're not talking about the people who steal and lie or the people who don't want to be held accountable. We're talking about the ones who step up and say, you got me. This is what I did. Whatever the consequences are, I'll endure that. And then I'm going to work my ass off to make sure that I prove to you that I'm not going to do anything of that nature again. But these people are out there and they're not being given that chance. Let me know what you guys think. I mean, look, I don't have the answers. No one has the answers. But if we come together and we can have honest discussion, you know, even if we have differences of opinions, honest discussion at least clears the air and opens um, the door to finding a solution. Because without communication amongst each other, we're never going to find solutions to these problems that plague our society. So let me know what you guys think. Um, Subscribe to my page, follow me on all the social networking sites, all the links in the description. Definitely like this content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace and love.